15 minutes.
Okay.
All right.
I'm Mike and I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Mike.
I've been called a suspect before, but never an Alcoholics Anonymous. And guilty as charged, though. Anyway, I am Mike and I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is April 17th, 2000. So, and my first experience as an intergroup was just as I'll get into that before I qualify or whatever, was actually 1 year after that. I was going to meetings in West Seattle. I'd come down here and answered phones with a group on, I can't even remember, it was on a Sunday. But the lady who was the intergroup rep for Seattle Intergroup at the time, Nancy H., was moving back to Buffalo. And she looked at me and said, hey, you should come on down and try this. And anyway, I was kind of conned into it. I didn't know what was really going on. But Nancy actually had the same sobriety date as me, but 20 years before. So April 17th. And I heckled her when she said that. I said, so going back to Buffalo, what's going on? She goes, I'm going back to visit my mom. I said, are you doing a 9 step? Anyway, but she did. She's lived very happily back there also. But I did come down to intergroup, and I did attend that board meeting. And there was some guys here at the board meeting. They were running it, and the guy is no longer with us, but I think he's passed on. But great servant to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I left that meeting. And I was on my 1 year birthday that night that I came down here, and I called my sponsor immediately after the meeting, and I said, this service of this type isn't going to work for me. And he said, well, what's going on? What's the issue? I said, well, I was down at that board meeting, you wouldn't believe it, but those people have control problems. They all want to run the show. And they all want to be in charge. And he says, so what's the problem? And I repeated it. He goes, well, you should fit right in. And another one of those, you son of a whatever. Yeah. But anyway, that was the start of the service for me. But, it took me decades to actually get into the rooms. I came in here because I was out of solutions. I could no longer figure out anything in my life. And whether I wanted to admit I was an alcoholic is a different story. On April 16th, 2000, if you came up and said, Mike, I think you're an alcoholic, we were taking it outside. But on April 17th, in 2000, I ended up in a treatment center. And it was because in the middle of the night, that night, I ended up falling to this friend of mine, and she ended up calling my brother. And I talked to him for about a little over an hour. And during that conversation, and I told him I needed help and I wanted my life to be different. And he knew that I needed help. And he knew kind of what the problem was. He knew what the problem was, but I didn't. So he kept asking me during this conversation, debate style, whether or not I was willing to do something different, whether I was willing to accept help. And I kept on going back to what the problem was, you guys, and the fact that alcohol and drugs was killing me, but that was all the other issues in my life. And he kept coming back to, well, are you willing to do something about it? Are you willing to actually accept help? Because I know you need help. And I know that if you don't do something, you're not going to make it. I realize that, but I can't wave a magic wand and cure you, and nobody else can. And we went on and finally asked, okay, I got to get up and go teach these kids tomorrow. I'm going to ask you one more time. Are you actually willing to accept help? And I said, I had a moment of clarity and I said, yes. And the next day I ended up in a treatment center. And we talked a long time. He took me to the treatment center, and on the way over to that treatment center, he actually asked me, he goes, there's only one thing I ask of you, with your demeanor. Will you be open-minded to accepting spiritual help? And at that point, I'm like, yeah, whatever. What am I going to do? You got me hostage. We're halfway between Seattle and Yakima. What am I going to say? And, but I was defeated. And it took years to get here, that thing that we talk about that got here. And just briefly, I'll go back and talk about just for a minute that, because she's a big part of my life, of this little grandkid. But after I graduated from high school, I moved down here into South King County and attended a 2-year college. It was basically a geographic. I was running from myself. I didn't know it at the time. I thought I was going to get an education. But I ended up leaving that school because the dean of students called me in on 2 occasions at least and said, Mike, you're taking up a seat that belongs to a student. You need to attend the classes. And I was having a problem doing that. So anyway, under mutual agreement, I left that and I entered the trades. I found a job in the construction industry. And that first day on the job, the boss bought us a 6-pack for the drive back from Des Moines to Kent. And when we got back to the office, there was a case of beer waiting. And the next morning, I called the college and said, I no longer need to be in your situation. I found a job and it looks like it's going to work out pretty good for me. So, but I kind of meandered and stumbled and did all those things that we do. And then, and here she comes. Her calling me a suspect. That doesn't, I don't, anyway. But anyway, a lot of things happened, and I found a home bar. I found a place where I could call home and go to drink and, those things. And basically got 86'd out of all the bars in the local community where I was at in South King County. And, but this one bar. And then I actually got 86'd out of there for some justifiable anger that happened, and they call it assault and battery. But anyway, the judge, because I hadn't been in trouble, said, hey, this happened in a bar and some things. Maybe you should look into this. Maybe alcohol's a situation. But I did. I went and followed the court's orders and got an assessment. And the lady said that I had some issues with drinking, and I told her where to go because I wasn't done. And I went back to my home bar and I was pretty shaken up. I didn't know what I was going to do because here I was under court orders to go get an assessment and do this. And the lady said I was an alcoholic and that she had a program that I could get into and that my insurance would cover that. Whew, this was a lot for me. But when I walked into that night, my friend Keith was sitting there and said, what's the matter, Mike? And I said, I went for my assessment for that assault. And the lady said, I'm an alcoholic. And Keith, my friend, said, Mike, you're no more alcoholic than I am. I'll buy you a drink. And that's what I needed. It was 13 years before I got here. But in the meantime, boom, something had happened. And I, figured out how to beat that rap, of course. I had some help. But in the meantime, I started to do things to prove I wasn't an alcoholic controller. I knew that, boom. And I met this lady that drank like I did, like baseball, cocaine too. And she had a couple little girls. And I knew that having this family was going to take care of my situation and give me responsibility, commitment, and those things that I hadn't had in my life. And so we got married. And it was living hell. And then I walked out on that family, never to go back about 8 years later, because it seemed like I needed to go get drunk and go get loaded. And then, but those 2 girls, they grew up for that. But anyway, and then finally I got sober. It was another 3 years before I got to that desperation on April 16th, 2000, that I was that place. But in the meantime, it was every day drinking and drugging, and the boss calling me in on the carpet, taking drug tests, doing this and that. And nobody could figure out what was wrong with me because I was trying to hide it so well. But anyway, I got here, and that was the start of it. Coming down here to getting out of that treatment center, starting to take the steps, coming back to West Seattle, moving in with my brother that took me to treatment, him and his wife for a few months. and get grounded in the program, coming in here and saying, I'm willing to do whatever because, and it doesn't have to be my idea. And for me, that's all it really had to be, was willingness, surrender. And I didn't know what the hell surrender was, but my counselor explained to me in treatment, Mike, it was, we surrender to live. People, wave the white flag because they want to go on. They don't want to die. And you have a choice. You can go on to that bitter end, that miserable death, or you can accept help. And I said, I give up. And, then I took it back. And boom, boom, boom. And like we all do. So I got started in the program. And as Laura said, service has been a huge part of my thing. But service, of course, coming down here and doing that, having that statement that night with my boss and these people, you'll fit right in with these cougars, and getting involved allowed me to look at myself, see my character defects, take the steps, look at the inventory, look at who I was, identify these things. So service has been very powerful in that aspect. It's helped me to find out who the heck I am. Some of those things that I like, and some that are very good, and then some of those things I don't like that drive me crazy and drive some of you crazy when I'm in a service thing with you. So, but and those things. But, and then getting through all that stuff and changing my behaviors through the steps 6 and 7. And then finally getting into, being able to take those amends. And I started the amends, when I came in here within that first year, and the financial amends. And of course, my sponsor saying, I'm thinking once I get through the financial amends and clear up all this stuff and the credit and boom, all this stuff, I'll be fine. Everything else will work out. And he said, oh, that's the easy part, man. You're employable now. You can pay off those debts. It's that emotional sobriety that was thinking about, it's going to, but yeah, dropping the rock, 6, becoming willing to look at that stuff and change those things. And then finally, what happened is I got to go sit down with my stepdaughters and make amends to them, even though I'd been making a living amends, and they'd become a part of my life. And this was after I made amends to my dad. But when I sat down and I told them, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right to you girls for the rest of your life. My 2 stepdaughters said, we want you to adopt us. And I looked at them and go, what? One of them was about to become an adult, and the other one was an adult. I'm like, you sure? Yeah. And yeah, we did it. And I adopted these 2 girls. Two years ago on New Year's Eve, I'm estranged from my youngest daughter, the one that I adopted. I've been estranged, and everybody in the family has, because she's out there gripping and ripping and doing what we do. And I hadn't talked to her in about 5 years. And I texted her, and sometimes she'll answer back. And her sister hadn't talked to her, mother hadn't talked to her, or whatever. But on New Year's Eve of 2022, I called, and I didn't get her. So I called a friend, and she was there, and I talked to her, and I asked her how she was doing. And she told me about Lily. She goes, I had a little baby girl on the day after Christmas. And I'm like, wow. And that night, the next day, I got to go down to see the baby, and the baby wasn't at the hospital, but the baby was at this place where they take care of babies that are exposed to all the stuff that we do. And she was there for 45 days. And anyway, the state of Washington decided that when this baby was leaving the facility, that the baby should go live with grandpa, because my daughter said, I want the baby to stay in the family, and I want my dad to have her. And so it's me and her. She is a bundle of energy and a miracle, and a joy. And I get that. But that's the direct result of taking the 12 steps, the 9th step promises. If I hadn't made amends to my daughters, this would have never happened. And I see it, but that's just part of it, so I'm blessed. I have no idea what's going to keep going on. I went to a meeting last night, and I come to meetings because I need to find out what the wisdom to know the difference still. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. I think, okay, the courage to change the things I can. And how the heck do I know what those are? I come to meetings and hear the wisdom to know the difference from you guys, because I figure that crap out, and I'm pretty much playing God and telling God needs to be done. So I keep coming back, and I am blessed to still be involved in Night Watch because this whole thing is happening. I'm like, whoa, I'm blessed. I have the best service position in Alcoholics Anonymous still, which I ended up with when COVID, 2 months before COVID started. They called me up and they asked me if I would get back involved with Night Watch. And that was in December of 2019. And then in 2020, we all know what happened. And here in March of 2020, everything shut down, and I'm the Night Watch chairperson, getting the schedule, vetting people, talking to people about what Night Watch is. I talked to over 200 alcoholics during that next year and a half of COVID to talk about Night Watch. It seemed like every day I was on the phone with an alcoholic about Night Watch, and the phones we do it. I'm like, oh my God, God is doing again for what I can't do for myself. I was leery of taking this service position, but all I have to do is be willing, suit up and show up, and leave the rest to God, and He will speak to me through you guys. So it's been a blessing and a miracle. And I don't know if my time's up or whatever was at that clock. So, yeah, and she's here. So we'll thank you guys for letting me come here tonight. Thanks.